I haven't signed up with the publisher or anything. I've got no deadlines. My only deadline is my own death. That's a very that's a very unchangeable deadline, but nobody knows when it will come. I don't want to have a publisher chasing me. And I think a translator is like an intimate servant. You're there to show respect and love to your master, who is the writer.
In the past 20 years, you have picked on very serious classical masterpieces, canons like 易经, 孙子兵法, and 道德经. And the 易经to me is always the Chinese Bible, right? To me, it's the Chinese Bible. 易经. So how did you come up, translating those canons? Did you choose them? Did you pick them?
To be honest, Elsie, it wasn't my choice. I was approached by Viking Penguin in New York. They had a very lovely director at the time called Carolyn White, and she wrote to me, said, we'd like to commission a new translation of Sun Tzu Bingfa. To be honest, I don't like Sun Tzu Bingfa at all. It's not my kind of book.
Right.
But a friend of mine advised me to do it. He said, "Go on, John, do it. You'll earn money." So I said, "Okay." I actually needed money at that time because I was. I made this decision in 1999 to quit the academic world and to go to France and become a farmer. I grew grapes for 5 years. But growing grapes does not put bread on the table, So I needed to earn some money. So I did that. It took me about 2 years. And then when it was published, I gave an interview to an online Sun Tzu kind of website, because Sun Tzu's full of crazy kind of fans, They all think he's like Heil Hitler, And this website interviewed me. And the last question on the interview, it was an email interview, was, "Is there any other Chinese classic you've ever thought of translating in your life?" And I said, "Well, yes, of course. Ever since I was a student, I've been fascinated by the I Ching, Anyway, this very nice lady in New York, Carolyn White, she sent me an email within 5 minutes of receiving this website thing. "When can I send you the contract for the I Ching?" And I dug myself into a hole, because I wasn't being serious, but she was deadly serious. And anyway, I think she gave me, in the contract, she gave me 5 years. I actually took 12 years to do it. And it was a very demanding business. I don't think my translation is necessarily that good, but I did put my heart and soul into it. I did an awful lot of reading and thinking, and I believe it's a very special book, I think it's a very, very amazing book. But I wouldn't call my translation scholarly. It's a kind of, it's an attempt to understand the book. I don't think it's going to do any harm. I get some very nice feedback from people, about who use it. It doesn't sell very many copies. I mean, it usually sells about 10 copies a week, That's about 1.5 copies a day, That's not very, you can't live off that,
I have one copy. As soon as it was published, I was so surprised, right, to see your copy that, in the bookshop. And I, without any hesitation, I bought it because I realized, I know at least I respected, anybody who had the guts, to translate I Ching, right? It's because it's the Chinese Bible to me. If we have the chance, I would definitely give you my copy for an autograph.
I do. I've done quite a lot of consultations for friends, using my translation, and it usually works. I think for me that's the ultimate criterion with the I Ching is whether it works in a consultation. If somebody asks a question, does it come up with an answer? That makes sense. Is it helpful? And I tried very hard to make mine helpful. But I'm never going to go back and revise it because I couldn't ever. And then the Tao Te Ching followed on that, So basically those 3 books were a kind of sideline, basically. I shan't do any more like that because they're too hard work, frankly. I prefer doing stories, I prefer telling stories about ghosts and lovely ladies, I mean, for me, that's far more pleasure than translating Yijing or Sun Zibin. Of course, Dao De Jing is a bit different. Dao De Jing is a very, very wonderful book. I mean, that's pure music. And I did enjoy doing that. But that was also quite a few years of work. I'm not doing anything more like that. I'm getting, I'm too old now. I just do things that I can finish in a few days, like a short Liao Jai story, No, but it wasn't ever intended to be like that. I was approached by this lady. I have no idea why she chose me. I have absolutely no idea, but she turned out to be very nice. We corresponded for a few years. She quit her job to go and live in the country in New England, in Berkshire, in New England, in America. And we became good friends. She was a wonderful publisher. And the new publisher at Viking, John Siciliano, he's also become a friend. So for me, over the years as a translator, I've been very fortunate to have not just wonderful authors, but also a few wonderful publishers who've been very sympathetic. And one of the books I feel happy about was an anthology I did with Joseph Lau called an anthology of classical Chinese literature. And that was largely possible because the director of Chinese U Press, T.L. Jim, was my friend and a very enthusiastic promoter of that project. So good publishers are a translator's best friend, I mean, the dogs are a man's best friend, but publishers are a translator's best friend. Because they help you be part of the real world,
Right.
And then, of course, Chinese poetry is so wonderful, I mean, I'm not a very good translator of poetry, but I enjoy doing it. I especially like Song Ci, I translated some of those, and I specialize in those, really. And the more you do, the more you understand them, and the more you have fun with them. And incredible pleasure. I mean, I think the Song Ci, which were, after all, very closely associated with, ladies of pleasure. I mean, sing-song girls, they were part of the enjoyment of life, Elsie, and they were not dry as dust poems. These were poems written either by sing-song girls or for sing-song girls or with sing-song girls or in that sort of milieu, that environment, whether it was in Xi'an or later on in Hangzhou or in Nanjing, there were these amazing areas where this kind of culture flourished. And it was a culture of pleasure, also a culture of intense melancholy and sorrow, because it was about love and about the way love never lasts very long. So they have built into them an incredible sensitivity to the transience of life, I mean, recently in my old age, I've been reading the whole of that huge novel by Marcel Proust, called in Remembrance of Things Past. And it's all about that. I mean, I think Marcel Proust had a very Chinese sensibility, very intense aesthetic sensibility, and a very strong sense of the a bit like Paul Seng, the ambiguity between dream and reality, the unreliability of life, the unreliability of human emotions, the way that love comes and love goes, and then you forget about it, and then you have a new one, and you forget about that one, and then you build up a kind of almost skeptical layers of feeling. And I found reading Proust in this late part of my life very, very interesting, because he has so much in common. Even I sometimes think he reminds me of Zhuangzi, the Chinese philosopher, who, the butterfly metaphor about, am I a butterfly dreaming I'm Zhuangzi, or am I Zhuangzi dreaming I'm a butterfly?
Which of your translations do you like best?
God, I've never really thought about that. Probably Liao Jai, I think that's what has most of me in it, I'm still working on it. I'll be working on it until I die, basically, because I love it so much. I'm a bit obsessed with it, actually. I'm probably haunted by some kind of, ghost, or, fox spirit or something, I am definitely possessed, I think. And that's fine. That's fine by me. I don't mind, The real world is so boring, I'm happy to live in a world of pure fantasy, And I think it's so beautiful. It's so beautifully written. It gives a great deal of joy. I think pleasure is not as good a word as joy. Joy is a more intense word than pleasure. I'm not really a sinologist. No, I mean, I use sinology like scholarship. I use sinology as a tool for translation, basically. My priority is in the translation, not in sinology per se. For example, I'm not interested in all the arguments in Hongxue, about whether Cao Xie was fat or thin, or, I really couldn't care less. I'm interested in translating the novel, and the same with Pu Sungning. I will use enough sinology to help me with the translation, but sinology in itself doesn't really interest me. But I'm basically a popularizer and someone who enjoys the fun and the creativity of translation. That's where the fun is,
So you're most satisfied with the label like translator?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't mind being called a teacher because I enjoy teaching, because teaching is about human communication, and I've had many students over the years. I first started teaching translation in 1980 in Tianjin in North China, and some of those students I taught then are still my friends, 40 years later. And then I taught in Hong Kong, I taught in Australia, I taught in New Zealand. I made many good friends. And some of my friends are now teaching in Hong Kong, some of them are teaching in Australia, and we've remained friends over the years, So teaching is a very human activity, and it's a way you can share your enthusiasms and your passions, and that I find very fulfilling. I enjoy teaching. I taught and studied in Hong Kong for 15 years, and I owe a great deal to Hong Kong. It was a very good place for me. All my children went to school there, and many of my friends still live there, and some of them, of course, have now passed on, like Elsie. But I mean, I have a very great affection for Hong Kong. It's like my second home, really.
Did you earn much of your bread here?
Of course,
to support you as a translator?
That's what I went to Hong Kong for, was to get a job teaching translation, because there was a great demand for it. So I did it at Chinese U, I did it at Open University, I did it at the Polytechnic. I gave lectures also at Lingnan and at Hong Kong U. So, I mean, all over the place. And there was never a shortage of work to do in Hong Kong, because it's a major world center for translation, That's because of its unique position. And I really enjoyed teaching graduate students. I mean, when I first started at Chinese U in 1982, I used to have some of the MA students to do their final project with me, and we would work together. We would collaborate, basically. And I think that was the ideal way of teaching translation, one-on-one, intensive, lots of time. But of course, universities hate that because it's so expensive, They wanted to do in big groups, and preferably online. And I mean, later on, when I was teaching at Chinese U in 2011, I was the director of the MA program, and I taught the translation workshop. And that was very good as well, because we used to just go over to students' work. They would talk about each other's work.
Right.
But even that was not as good as the one-on-one stuff, I think there is no shortcut. It's like an apprenticeship, You have to sit down with the apprentice. I was the apprentice to David Hawkes. That's how I learned. It was one-on-one. Every week I'd go to his house and sit with him and ask him questions. And he taught me one-on-one. It was the best way, First of all, don't read any translation theory. It's a complete waste of time. It won't help you at all. It'll just get you more muddled and waste your time. However, go and buy the bilingual edition of Hong La Meng, which has the Chinese on the left-hand side and the English on the right-hand side. That will improve your Chinese, it'll improve your English, and it'll improve your translation skills. I mean, it'll help you to understand about translation, because forget about my part, but David Hawkes's translation of Hong La Meng is an absolute work of genius. It's quite extraordinary. You know, I still learn Chinese characters every day because there is no end to it, you know. There is no end to it. There are so many of the damn things, and it's so hard. And you just have to keep being humble and learning every day and writing them down and not being afraid to look them up in the dictionary. And every word you look up, you have to look up 5 more, because the dictionary definition contains words you don't know, you know, if you use a Chinese dictionary. So, I mean, it's a never-ending process of studying.
It's studying, but it's self-fulfillment and enjoyment, as you said, right?
Exactly, because the actual language itself is so beautiful. It's such an amazing language. If it wasn't, I would have given up years ago. But I still derive incredible joy from a Chinese character. You know, it might be a very obscure one, but I finally find out what it means, and I think, wow, what a beautiful character. And as I said, I would give them a good novel, or Hong La Meng bilingual edition, or, you know, even Arthur Whaley, you know, I mean, something like that. And let them read good literature. Let them read good writing, you know. I always say the same thing. The only other thing I always say to translators is, don't forget to live, you know. Don't forget to have a life. Don't just go to your desk and open the dictionary and translate, but have a life, you know. Go out for a walk, listen to some music, go traveling, or do something nice. Go and have a swim, you know, fall in love, do something. But don't just be a translator, because otherwise you'll have no experience to rely on, you know. How can you understand a great writer like Cao Xue-Chin if you've never lived? You can't. And half of my time, at least half of my time, is spent trying to improve my skills as a writer of English. Therefore, I'm always reading in English. I'm always reading English literature, because that's the only way to improve. And there are so many wonderful English books. I keep discovering new ones all the time. I keep notebooks in which I always try to read, you know, with a critical eye. And if I find that I'm reading and I find a really good expression or word, or I'll jot it down in my notebook. And so I've got notebook after notebook full of my notes. And that's a way of the way I describe it, Elsie, is like this. We all have a huge amount of passive knowledge of language, which is down at the bottom here. But what we need to do is to turn the passive into the active.
Right.
I'm starting to sound like a translation theorist now, but actually it's not theory at all. It's very practical. So from reading and making critical notes is a way of trying to turn passive knowledge into active knowledge. For example, you might know 2 or 3 words for how to walk into a room, but if you keep reading, you'll learn about 20 different words, because a good writer always has a much wider range of possibilities than a beginner writer, you know. And I'm still a beginner, I'm both in English and in Chinese, so I do a lot of critical reading, and that's what I always encourage my students to do. It doesn't have to be very difficult stuff. You don't have to always read Shakespeare, you know. You can never go wrong with people like Jane Austen, for example. You know, Jane Austen was an absolute wonderful stylist. But also, if you like detective fiction, you know, read P.D. James. P.D. James writes superb English. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, you just never stop. My only advice is just to keep reading, you know. Nowadays, the younger generation, they don't read, you know, and they're losing the ability to read. And that's a terrible loss, I think.
Yeah, young people nowadays, they read WhatsApp, you know, Instagram messages,
I know.
snapshots. So they really have a snapshot view of the world.
Indeed.
Snapshots. So
that's no good for a translator. A translator has to be a craftsman, you know. And so I think good translators tend to be very traditional, very old-fashioned, because they are concerned with the quality of the written word. You know, they're concerned with the joy of language, of the written language. And it doesn't give you instant gratification, you know. If you go online, you can immediately, you know, even though I'm a big admirer of Wikipedia, it's not a substitute for reading a book, you know. I mean, some of the Wikipedia articles are very good, but, you know, what's the matter with looking in a book, you know? I don't understand it, you know. Nowadays, you can't even, you go to the second-hand shops and the books are all being sold for like 50 cents, you know, because nobody wants a book anymore. I remember going to a meeting of the Translation Society way back in 1983, I think it was, when it was just literally a kind of lunch club, you know. People just met at I think it was called the Metropole Hotel in Kowloon. I think it belonged to a friend of T.C. Lai's. And my main friends in the society were Stephen Sung and T.C. Lai. And I went along to some of their lunches. I went along once with Angus Graham, who was a lovely man from London. He was visiting and he gave a talk. And I met him at Star Ferry, and it was pouring with rain, and he got absolutely sopping wet. And when we got to the hotel, he said, could he borrow my clothes? So we had to do a kind of swapping of clothes in the gentleman's toilet. And he was too wet to speak. So I gave him my clothes and I sort of dried out of it. And then it was very informal in those days. And after, I think a few days later, I went with Angus Graham. He was a very good translator, incidentally. I went with him to have lunch with D.C. Lau. Another great friend which I had in common with D.C. Lau was a lady called Dorothy Liu. And she taught at SOAS as well. And she was a lovely lady. And her daughter, Tao Tao Liu, she taught me my first Chinese lessons at Oxford in 1966. They were very close friends of D.C. Lau's because they taught together at SOAS. I felt very honored because some of the previous people who had been made honorary fellows included Yang Xianyi, who was a great friend of mine, and his wife Gladys. And so I felt I was in very distinguished company, you know. And I've always had a nice feeling about the Translation Society. I think it's a very pleasant group of people, you know. I've always had nice experiences with them. Starting off with Stephen Sung, you see, way back in 1980. And yeah, I like that kind of rather informal gathering of people, not too sort of academic. I mean, because I think translation shouldn't be considered as a purely academic activity, you know. It's amateur enthusiasts, you know. That's what I liked about it. Well, maybe I like the way that again, it was when C.C. Liu was the head of it, when they very kindly subsidized publication. That's a wonderful thing to do, because often, you know, especially now, university presses are very hard up, and if they ever have any spare money in the budget, you know, I think a very worthwhile thing is to help young translators get published. I think encourage young people more than anything else to focus on the art of translation and not sort of and in a kind of non-academic way, you know, in a more creative context, and get experienced translators to give workshops and things like that. I don't know. The universities tend to kill translation dead, you know, because they have to turn it into an academic subject. Otherwise, they can't justify their existence, you know. And don't try and do what the universities do. Be a bit free from all that, you know. And I think just carry on doing the good work that you're doing, you know. Have nice meetings, nice meals. I remember when I was the chair of the RGC translation panel, I was always arguing on behalf of translations that they should be recognized as research, you know, because there's always a problem. And in that sense, the Translation Society could form a kind of lobby group with some of the leading practitioners in Hong Kong to try and make the RGC recognize, even someone like Huang Guobin's translation of Dante was considered to be just a translation, For goodness sake, it was a major piece of research, And when I published my I Ching, the Bible, in Australia, every year the Department of Education gives publications a score, from 1 to 5. No, from 0 to 5. And my I Ching got 0 because it was just a translation. And the dean of my faculty was so angry, he wrote them a long letter. So they changed it from 0 to 5. Because they have no kind of method of assessing a translation, I spent 12 years researching that book, Of course it should have been 5. It was the result of a huge amount of research,
So translation is invisible on that scale of, academic research.
I know, it's ridiculous. It's despised. It's a poor relation, They're terribly prejudiced. The same in Hong Kong.
Yes.
But I don't know what you could do about that. But anyway, maybe a lobby, I don't know.
So thank you very much, Professor Minford. It's really nice talking to you.
It's a real pleasure talking to you, yeah.